Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take often complex research and really try to boil it down so you're instantly well informed. Today, we're tackling a really massive issue, but one that's been, well, critically invisible for a long time.
Eh?
The true scale of global inland fisheries.
Yeah, for years, researchers have kind of felt the official numbers just don't quite add up. So we're diving into this landmark paper, Putting the Fish into Inland Fisheries, a global allocation of historic inland fish catch. It's led by Rachel F. Ainsworth and her team. And they basically attempted to solve this huge statistical mystery, one with massive implications for food security all over the world.
Absolutely. The mission here is, frankly, urgent. Because these inland fisheries, we're talking fish caught in rivers, lakes, floodplains, they've historically been almost completely left out of major global policy discussions and definitely out of the official statistics. They're effectively invisible. So this team's goal was really to synthesize all this incredibly fragmented data, often only available at the basin level, to finally build a reliable, comprehensive global picture of this hidden harvest. Right. And if you're wondering, okay, why does this level of detail really matter? Just think about the scale. These systems support the livelihoods of maybe up to 820 million people globally. That's enormous. And then in developing nations, something like 90%, a staggering 90% of the inland catch is eaten directly. It's not exported, it's consumed locally. That makes it an absolutely essential, non-negotiable part of food security in those regions.
Yeah, we are literally talking about the main source of protein for hundreds of millions of people. And, when you look at why the reporting is so poor, you see the challenge immediately. It's structural. Unlike, say, big marine operations that are often quite consolidated, inland fishing is just incredibly dispersed. It's fragmented, it's often seasonal, involves maybe dozens of different species, and it's almost always small scale.
Yeah, how do you even begin to monitor that?
Exactly. Imagine trying to track tens of thousands of individual fishers, maybe in canoes, spread across a vast floodplain. It's just extremely difficult to capture that data effectively, let alone consistently year after year.
And this difficulty with the data, it leads directly to what the research really highlights as a severe policy conflict, doesn't it?
It does.
When governments or big international funders are deciding how to use shared water resources, maybe for huge hydropower dams or agricultural irrigation or expanding cities, inland fisheries often get pushed aside because, well, on paper, their economic value looks small.
They consistently lose the fight for the water flows they need to survive, simply because the official data doesn't show their true importance.
So the value isn't seen.
Precisely. And the official numbers really reflected this bias for a long time. Just for context, back in 2010, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, they reported the global inland catch at about 10.8 million tons.
Okay.
But even then, independent studies, maybe using consumption models or regional surveys, they always suggested much higher figures. There was the Big Numbers Project, which put it around 13 million tons, and then household consumption surveys pushed that estimate even higher, somewhere closer to 16.6 million tons.
Wow. Okay. So we've got this massive gap, potentially almost 6 million tons, between the official report and what seemed to be happening on the ground.
Exactly. A huge discrepancy.
What's really compelling, too, is that even using those flawed official numbers, when researchers tried to combine them with estimates of the unreported catch, the total economic use value of this sector globally was still valued at a massive 43 billion US dollars.
Right. That's hardly insignificant.
Definitely not a hobby. It's like a globally significant industry basically operating in the shadows.
Yeah.
So clearly, we needed a new approach to actually see it. Which brings us right to the methodology, and this is where the paper gets really innovative, I think. The traditional way, just adding up data by country, it turned out to be pretty unreliable.
Yeah, very problematic.
Because, rivers and huge lakes, they cross borders all the time.
Yeah.
So you get double counting. Or fish caught in one country's part of a river getting attributed to another.
Or just missed entirely.
Exactly. So the authors saw this flaw and they shifted their focus. They used the river basin approach. That became their core unit of analysis.
Yes, measuring the ecosystem, not the political boundary. That was the key insight.
Makes sense.
Understanding how fish are actually produced by the whole system, the basin is crucial for getting an accurate assessment. So they pulled together fisheries statistics from river basins, lakes, floodplains, and also individual countries, covering a really long period, 1960 right up to 2018. They calculated an overall weighted average year for their catch estimates as 2010. That became the baseline, for comparing with the FAO number.
Okay.
And initially, they focused on just 45 major river basins and lakes. Their estimate was that these systems alone probably account for about 94% of all the global inland capture fisheries statistics,
Yeah.
so the vast majority.
But putting that data puzzle together must have been incredibly complex, like forensic accounting almost, especially for huge countries where the official reporting is done at a much higher level, like the province or state, not the river basin itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's take China as an example.
Yeah.
Their inland fishery stats are reported by province, right? But one province might cover parts of several different river basins.
Correct.
So how do they figure out how to split that provincial catch total among the different river basins within it without having local reports?
Well, this is where they had to make a sort of crucial but necessary assumption. They used geographic information systems, GIS basically, and they partitioned the provincial fish catch pro rata. Essentially, they divided up the reported catch based on the physical area that each river basin occupied within that province's border.
Okay, but hang on. If you're dividing the catch based just on area, doesn't that assume that the fishing intensity, like the amount of fish caught per square kilometer, is the same everywhere in the province? I mean, is it the same in a super productive river delta as it is way upstream in some low-flow headwater? That sounds like a pretty big assumption for something as varied as a river basin.
That's a really sharp point, and it absolutely highlights the challenge here. You're working with data that just wasn't collected for this specific purpose. And the researchers, they openly acknowledge this introduces uncertainty. But, without detailed sub-provincial data, it was really the best available method to bridge that gap, going from political units, the provinces, to ecological units, the basins. The alternative was just to ignore the data completely, which leaves an even bigger hole.
Right.
So their confidence comes partly from combining this pro rata estimate with careful uncertainty calculations later on, which helps define a plausible range rather than a single false point of precision.
Gotcha. And the complexity didn't stop there. You mentioned India earlier.
Mm.
Their state statistics often mix farmed fish aquaculture with the actual wild catch from rivers and lakes. You can't really judge the health of a wild river if you're including farmed fish in the numbers.
Exactly right. To figure out the true yield of the wild ecosystem, they had to meticulously identify and subtract the known cultured species. Things like Indian major carps, pangaseed catfish, they had to pull those out of the total reported harvest figures.
Why is that subtraction so critical?
Because the whole point of the paper is to assess the output and implicitly the health of these natural environments, the rivers, the lakes, which are often under threat. If the total reported catch looks stable, but it's only because fish farms are booming while the wild stocks are actually crashing, well, that masks a potential ecological catastrophe. You need to separate them.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So they dealt with spatial allocation, they dealt with separating wild versus farmed fish. But then there's the inherent variability of these systems. Inland catch isn't stable year to year. You get these boom and bust cycles, right?
Yeah.
Often driven by things like how much flooding there was in a particular year. How do they handle that kind of environmental chaos in their final number?
Yeah, that natural variation is huge. They used Monte Carlo simulations. So instead of aiming for just one single number for the global catch, which would be misleadingly precise given the fluctuations, they ran thousands of simulations. This allowed them to calculate a range of potential catch estimates for the different basins and ultimately for the global total. It acknowledges that high year-to-year variation and gives them a statistically robust potential range rather than just one potentially inaccurate number.
So a much more realistic picture.
Much more realistic. And this incredibly complex basin-focused stitching together of all this data, it led them to their central and frankly quite shocking finding. The collated statistics suggest a global inland catch of approximately 17.4 million tons for that baseline year of 2010.
17.4 million tons. It's probably, let's try to visualize it. That's like the weight of what, maybe 1.7 million city buses?
Something like that, yeah. It's a staggering amount.
And that 17.4 million figure, it's 60% higher, 60, than the official FAO number of 10.8 million tons for the very same year.
Yeah.
It basically confirms what those earlier household consumption models were hinting at. It proves the vast scale of this hidden harvest.
It really does. And the bulk of this catch, somewhere between 50 and 65% of that estimated global total, it comes from the major river basins. What's also really important to grasp is that this productivity isn't evenly spread. It's heavily concentrated in tropical and subtropical latitudes.
So Asia and Africa.
Primarily Asia and Africa, yes. They are doing the lion's share of the work when it comes to producing inland fish.
And now, thanks to this basin-level work, we can actually put names to these, well, engines of food production. The world's largest inland fisheries are really concentrated in just 4 systems. And together they account for 28%, nearly the third of the entire estimated global total.
Just 4 systems.
Yeah, they are. The Mekong River, with an estimated mean catch of 2.1 million tons a year. Just incredible.
Astonishing.
Then the Brahmaputra River system at 1.0 million tons. The Irrawaddy, 0.9 million tons. And Lake Victoria, also massive, clocking in around 0.9 million tons annually.
Think about that. Those 4 systems alone, Mekong, Brahmaputra, Irrawaddy, Lake Victoria, are providing almost 5 million tons of fish a year.
They're like nutritional superpowers for their regions and really for the world.
Absolutely. But despite these huge catches, the problem of underreporting is just pervasive. They estimated that the total underreporting, or unaccounted for national production, added up to 4.1 million tons globally.
4.1 million tons missing from the boats.
Losing. And the biggest gaps were found exactly where the catches are highest, South and Southeast Asia. Thailand, for example, was estimated to be underreporting by almost 1 million tons, 0.97 million tons. Brazil, another giant, missing over 400,000 tons from their official stats.
Which just begs the question, doesn't it? Why? Why is 4.1 million tons of fish, that's more than the total inland catch reported by entire continents, why is it being hidden or missed?
Well, the authors point to basically 3 main reasons, and they're all linked back to that decentralized, small-scale nature of the fishery we talked about. First, there's the subsistence or informal catch. This is fish caught just for the family to eat, or maybe sold in very local, informal markets. It never hits an official ledger. It's just not designed to be tracked that way.
Right. Go straight from the river to the cooking pot, essentially.
Pretty much. Second, there's recreational fishing. Now, in many developed countries, this is often seen purely as leisure, right?
Yeah, sport fishing.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the total catch from recreational fishing can actually be quite substantial. They estimate it could contribute as much as 5.4% of the total reported global catch. But in places like, say, Finland or Sweden or New Zealand, this data is rarely required or factored into the national statistics, which are usually focused only on commercial production.
So another source of hidden catch, even in wealthy countries.
And finally, there's this massive, pervasive problem with species identification, or lack thereof. The researchers found that between 1950 and 2019, on average, 59%, nearly 60% of the total reported inland fisheries catch globally was just lumped into these vague categories: unidentified fish, unidentified crustacean, or unidentified mollusk.
60% unidentified.
Yeah. They use the term NAI for this catch, which stands for not elsewhere identified.
Not elsewhere identified. Wow.
Using NAI is a gigantic problem for analysis. It means for almost 6 decades, more than half the reported catch is basically useless if you want to do detailed trend analysis. You can't track the health of a specific species. You can't tell if a particular type of fish is declining because of pollution or overfishing if you don't even know what species was caught in the first place.
It just completely blocks any kind of accurate ecological monitoring or understanding of what's really happening in the water.
Totally. It prevents accurate ecological trend mapping.
Okay, so we have this huge discovery. 17.4 million tons, 60% higher than reported. But here's the really sobering part that comes with it. The study strongly suggests that this 2010 figure, this massive number, it might actually represent the historic maximum of global inland fish catch.
Yeah.
We might already be past the peak.
That's the worrying conclusion, yes. That we're likely past peak inland fish globally, and the data shows why the threats are really converging now. We're seeing recent sharp reductions in some of those previously highly productive areas.
Like where?
Well, for instance, China introduced a 10-year fishing ban on the Yangtze River. Ecologically, probably very necessary. But the immediate impact on reported catch was dramatic. China's reported inland catch fell by 40% in just 3 years, from 2.2 million tons in 2017 down to 1.4 million tons in 2020.
A huge drop, even if for good reasons. And then there's the other major systemic threat you mentioned earlier, infrastructure. Dams, basically.
Yes, particularly hydropower. Dam construction, combined with worsening water quality issues, is already causing noticeable declines in big river systems like the Ganges-Brahmaputra. And maybe most alarmingly, the projections for the Mekong River, remember, one of the world's top 4 producers.
Yeah, 2.1 million tons.
The projections suggest massive future losses there, potentially up to 880,000 tons of fish per year, lost directly because of planned dam construction along the main river and its tributaries.
almost 1 million tons potentially wiped out by dams in just one river system. That's terrifying.
It is, and it really underscores the need for better monitoring, which leads to the author's key recommendation for the future to address this chronic problem of fragmented, unreliable data and to track these declines accurately. They propose establishing a network of what they call sentinel fisheries.
Okay, sentinel fisheries. Let's unpack that. What would they actually do? How would they work?
So these wouldn't be just, occasional research projects. The idea is to select key river basins or specific lakes or even particular elements of a fishery and subject them to really robust, standardized, and crucially continuous monitoring over the long term.
Like permanent observation posts.
Exactly. They'd act as a permanent sampling system. They'd provide ongoing, reliable data streams for these otherwise data-poor fisheries. And in doing so, they'd basically function as health indicators for the entire basin's ecosystem and maybe even give us a better pulse on the global state of inland fishing.
A sort of early warning system.
Precisely, an early warning system. And the study actually identified some high-priority candidates for this kind of sentinel monitoring. They were chosen based on factors like their huge contribution to food security or high employment numbers, or because they're facing significant immediate threats, like those dams.
And these candidates, they represent a big chunk of the total catch.
They do. Together, the high-priority systems they list represent somewhere between 29% and 43% of the total estimated global catch.
Wow. So monitoring just a few key places gives you insight into a huge portion of the whole system.
That's the idea. High-priority systems they suggest include the African Rift Lakes, that's Victoria, Malawi, and Tanganyika. Also Tonle Sap Lake in Cambodia, which is connected to the Mekong, the Brahmaputra floodplain fishery in South Asia, and the Yangtze River in China, despite the fishing ban, because monitoring its recovery is crucial.
Makes sense. So establishing reliable, continuous monitoring in just those places could give us a much, much better handle on what's happening to a massive part of the world's hidden harvest.
That's the hope. It would be a huge step forward.
So wrapping this up, what's the major implication here from this deep dive for you, the listener?
I think the key takeaway is crystal clear. Inland fisheries are absolutely not some marginal, easily dismissed sector. They are vital. They provide substantially more food and livelihood support than we ever officially recognize. Remember that 60% higher figure?
But at the same time, this massive food source, now that we can finally see its true scale, is under immense and growing threat from infrastructure development and environmental changes.
Yeah, the paper really proves definitively that these fisheries are not just some economically unimportant side effect of how we manage water, yet they still tend to be neglected or just remain invisible in government policy processes, where water almost always gets earmarked for other uses, for hydropower, agriculture, cities.
Right.
By putting a realistic scale and value on the actual catch, this paper throws down a powerful challenge to that old way of thinking. It demands better management and, frankly, urgent protection for these essential ecosystems before we really do slide past that historic maximum catch.
It really forces you to rethink how we calculate global food security altogether, doesn't it?
It absolutely should.
I mean, if the most accurate estimates we have for inland fish catch are now coming from painstakingly aggregating fragmented basin-level research, doing the hard detective work from the bottom up, rather than relying on those top-down, aggregated, and often pretty wrong national reports.
What makes you wonder? How might the official reporting of all global food production need to be fundamentally reformed to actually capture this kind of hidden essential consumption accurately? Should we be thinking about moving away from national reporting towards more ecosystem-based reporting globally for all sorts of food sources?
That's a huge question.
It is, and it's a provocative thought for you to mull over as you dive back into your day, now well-equipped with the knowledge of the world's vast hidden fish harvest. Thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.